move around the edge of the room and we'll do some introductions. Don't worry, the pizza won't run far. Spread round the edge, folks. Okay, our talk today is going to be by Tim Leslie, building a collaborative engineering culture. But before that, we'll do a few introductions. And before that, we've got a meetup group. I think most of you are aware of it, but if not, now you do. We've got a meetup group. You can also catch us at techmeetup.co.uk. And I'd love to hear from anybody who wants to give talks. We've got a talk, hopefully, for next month, which will be about a tiny little supercomputer, hopefully. But if you would like to give a talk here, please do speak to me. A lot of people are like, oh, but I've never given a talk before. It's a great chance. And if you've given one before, you've had practice. So we'd love to see you as well. There's no escape. Other things that are going on in Edinburgh at the moment, Edinburgh Hack Lab's having its regular open nights. I think they're on Tuesdays over at Summer Hall. The Edinburgh School of AI is doing a wide variety of different talks in the evenings. There's one coming up on the 22nd. And Game Dev Edinburgh is also still knocking about at OX 184 on Southbridge. So, and if you know of anything else, tell each other. And now we'll introduce each other.
Hello. I'm Chris. I'm a C# full-stack.net developer. I'm here for the talks and the pizza.
Hi, I'm Andrew. I'm a software engineering teacher at Lloyd's. We're hiring pretty much anybody who wants to be a developer and wants to develop at Lloyd's. And I'm here for the talks and to network and mingle.
Hi everyone, I'm Christina. I'm from University of Edinburgh, and I'm here to meet new folk because I'm new in Edinburgh, and also network and the talks and the pizza.
Hello, I'm Tam. I'm a student next door at CodeClan. We're on week 6 doing JavaScript, just started. I'm here to meet some fun people and have some pizza and beer.
Yeah, I'm Alison. I'm from CodeClan. I'm basically what he said, so yeah.
I'm Joe, also from CodeClan. I came here like 5 weeks ago, maybe. It was a good pattern. I love pizza. Came back for it, and the beer is good too, so yeah.
Hey, I'm Chris. I'm changing careers, trying to get into IT, so I'm here to eat pizza like everyone else and network.
Hey everybody, I'm Peter. I'm software engineer at Amazon. It's my first time at a meetup, so I'm just trying it and see if I like it, but so far it's good.
Hi, I'm Paul. I'm a software engineer at Amazon. We're hiring. We're hiring software engineers, front-end engineers, program managers, product managers, managers, and also, most importantly, recruiters, so I don't have to do this.
Hello everyone, my name is Feng Zhou, and working a company called Cover based on the code-based hardware engineer. Come here for the pizza and meet people.
Hello everybody, my name is Artem. I'm also from Crover. We develop grain monitoring device. We're here for to eat pizza and hear something interesting.
Hi, I'm Chris. I work with HPC Systems and learning MicroPython on embedded devices. Talk to me about that.
Good evening, my name's Stephen. I've been a developer on GIS applications, mobile stuff, mainly in C#, and just recently, well, late last year, moved into a sales team, still a technical role, but in a sales team rather than a dev team. And there's been multiple people since that, part of the sales team have come up to me and said, "Oh, you've gone to the dark side." Ha 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 ha. And I'm not quite sure how to respond to that. But that seems to be a thing they like to say to me. So anyway, I'm still enjoying it. Still plenty techie and geeky enough for me. But there you go.
My name is Maciek. I'm we're working with EPCC as a sysadmin on HPC systems, and apart from that, I'm studying software engineering in Napier. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Daniel. I'm a linguistics student, and I'm here because it sort of has become my monthly habit.
Hey, I'm Peter. I'm an informatics student, and yeah, I'm here for the pizza and talks.
My name's Reese. I'm a computer science student at the University of Toronto, but I've been on exchange over here at the University of Edinburgh since September. I'm here primarily because I didn't eat lunch today and I'm really hungry.
Hi, I'm Ferdinando. I'm a .NET developer at a place called Origo, financial sector, and I like the pizza, I like the talks. I'm also a Copeland graduate. I'm happy to answer any questions you might have. I probably won't have the answers, but thank you.
I'm Douglas. I'm working for a mob called Future Sense, and we do Go stuff. And I help to run TechMeetUp in Stirling, and we need speakers. So if you wish to speak at a smaller and probably much more appreciative audience than here, and it's closer to any station, it's closer to Stirling Station than we are here to any of the Edinburgh stations, come and give us a talk. It doesn't matter what it's about. Nobody else in the room has a fucking clue. So you can amaze them with your brilliance. And I know almost everything in this room about.
John, I'm a student at CodeClan as well with those guys over there. And we're 6 weeks in now, so we know enough to know that we don't know a lot. So come tell us things.
Hi, my name's James, and I'm also from CodeClan. And yeah, we know stuff now. But I also like pizza, so.
Hi, my name's James. Same as these two guys. Hi, I'm Marian. I'm not these three guys, but I still think I don't know enough.
Hi, I'm Leon. I'm an analyst developer at Scottish Parliament, former CodeClan graduate. Was with that guy. So any questions you guys have, I'd be happy to answer. Here for the pizza and beer, and book a talk.
Hi, I'm Tim. I'm the one giving the talk, and I'm really happy that everybody's here for pizza rather than for me, which takes the pressure off massively. Thank you so much.
Hi, I'm Paul. I'm a software engineer at Optos. We make medical imaging devices. I'm a GPU specialist, and I'm here for the warm tenants.
Hi, I'm Laurie. I also work at Optos as a contractor. Optos are hiring, but please don't apply because I'll lose my job.
I also work for Optos. My name is Will, and if you go through me, I will get a bonus. Working in C#, liking and learning Rust, and loving type systems.
Hello, I'm Stuart Meikle. I don't work for Optos. I work for MasterCard as a software architect, and I'm here for networking and the talks.
Hi, I'm Lawrence. I work at TravelNest. I'm mostly a Python developer. I'm here for the talks. Not that I know anything about this other than it sounds cool. If someone wants to talk to me about compiling R to run in WebAssembly natively in the browser, I can put you in touch with someone who's got possibly money for an awesome project.
Hi, my name's Gordon. I'm a security engineer, and I spilled my pizza on the ground. I'm sorry.
Hi, I'm Adrian. I was working with Docker and Rust and stuff. I'm currently doing serverless and TypeScript, which is completely new to me. So if anyone wants to chat about that, that'd be cool. Yeah.
Hi, I just moved from the US, I think about a month ago. Like Steve, I think your name is. I'm also on the dark side of sales. But yeah.
Hi, I'm Ali. I'm a data engineer. I'm currently taking a wee break, but I am looking for new opportunities in data engineering, but particularly the bigger the data, the happier I am.
Hi, I'm Rachel. I'm a DevOps coach and consultant, and I'm here to meet you lot. A quick message for those of you who are just starting out in the software engineering world. None of us know what we're doing. We just get better at faking it.
Hello, I'm James. If you're looking for things around town, check out Open Tech Calendar, list tech events. I also work for Open Data Workers Co-op, all around Open Data. We were hiring, and now we're doing the interview process. So I'm very interested in talking about how you grow tech teams and how you interview developers.
Hi, I'm Thomas. Is this thing on? Testing, testing. Ah, there we go. It's quite not very sensitive. Not like this. Okay. Hi, I'm Thomas. I work at a research facility in Hamburg, and I do a lot of scientific Python. I'm lucky enough to get to work a lot on open source projects, including things related to Jupyter.
Hi everyone, my name is Shiraz. I work for the IT service desk at Storage Environment Scotland, and I'm here to learn all about tech so I can get promoted.
And I'm Justin, and I work for QueryClick as basically a data engineer and analyst. We are also hiring, and I noticed that Amazon weren't hiring back-end developers. So any back-end developers, we'll take you.
If everybody takes 5 to 10 minutes just to have a chat with all the people you've just found out all about, and then we'll have a talk.
climb down slowly. I'll turn it off for now.
Hello everyone. Can you hear me? No? Can you hear me now? Good, right. I'm going to use the microphone because I'm accused of muttering occasionally, so you'll just have to shout at me if you can't hear me. Yeah, I'm going to talk about building a collaborative engineering culture. It's my take on it. We'll see whether everybody agrees or disagrees and wants to throw pizza at me. That's fine. If you do, I might eat it. And yeah, questions. If you've got something burning, then feel free to shout it out. But I think most of them at the end would be probably easier, if that's right with you guys, rather than being interrupted constantly. But if there's something that makes a lot of sense in the moment, then feel free to ask. Cool. This is me. That's not me. That's my friend with the chainsaw. But yeah, I love lots of sort of outdoorsy things. I live out in the countryside. Some of you, I think, heard me speak before. At least one person came up to me and said they heard me speak before. I had a tractor break in my last talk. I'm not going to do that this time, unfortunately. But yeah, so I'm the CTO at Float, and have been since the beginning of this year. So that's exciting. Oops. Float's awesome. I love it. It's a really cool place. We're small. We're 17 people. We're 3 engineers going up to 4 engineers. Guess what? We're recruiting. And it's just a real breath of fresh air as a company. We think a lot about our culture. The CEO is a guy called Colin Hewitt. One of the things he said to me when he was recruiting me was that one of the ways that he defines success as a company is actually having a place where people want to turn up and work. So he wouldn't consider the company to be successful if it was worth £1 billion and everybody hated being there, which I think's it's quite refreshing actually. It's quite a nice way to look at life. And it's something that he really pays attention to, and we pay attention to as a company. The product is cash flow. We've got a plugin for Xero and QuickBooks, which are the accounting software, SaaS stuff. So I feel quite good about that too, actually, because what we're doing is we're making sure that companies don't go bust and don't run out of money, essentially. So that's Float. Onto the actual proper talk. So yeah, need to define what I mean by a collaborative culture first off, I think. Yeah, Elon Musk. I'm not a massive fan of Elon Musk. Stick your hands up if you love Elon Musk. Yeah, I'm going to piss a few people off by saying I'm not a massive fan of him. I don't mind him. I just think he's a bit of a sort of micromanager, and yeah, I don't know. But he's done some really cool stuff. I have to admit that he's pretty awesome in lots of ways. But anyway, he came up with this quote which I do like, which is the idea that everybody in the company is a vector, and your progress is determined by the sum of all vectors. So just kind of stick that in your mind. If everybody's moving in the same direction, then that's really good news. If people are pulling in opposite directions, then that's really bad news. You don't go anywhere as a company. So this is the traditional way of looking at alignment and autonomy. This is the way that a lot of people think about it. They think, on the left there you've got alignment, and on the right there you've got autonomy, and you've either got alignment or you've got autonomy. And if you've got autonomy, you're doing whatever the hell you want to do, and you're pulling in different directions. And if you've got alignment, then you're being told what to do. Yeah, because in this particular situation, I'm thinking about the alignment as being, this is what you are going to do, this is how you're going to do it, and it's kind of like and this is the dichotomy that I think some people have in their heads, is that you're either kind of told what to do, and that means that you're aligned and you're moving in the same direction, or you're not told what to do, and that means you're autonomous and you're all going in opposite directions, and it's a bit chaotic. And this is a false dichotomy, as you probably pointed out. So this is not the way that I think about life, and not the way I think not the way I think we should think about life. So instead, it's more of a there's more to it than that. You can have high alignment, high autonomy, low alignment, low autonomy, and off you go. So looking at that dichotomy again, we've got the authoritative organization top left, which has got low autonomy and high alignment. They're all being told exactly what to do all the time. It's a bit of a bore to work there, hence they've got sad faces. You've got the chaotic organization in the bottom right, where you've got high autonomy and low alignment. There's no vision, and nobody really knows what they're doing. And again, they might be quite happy, but actually they're probably not that happy, because the company's not really progressing very far, and everybody's putting in different directions, like I say. You then got the micromanaging organization, and this is where there's no real kind of vision, and the sort of boss is all in the details and putting you around in different directions there, and that's not somewhere you want to be, guys. Get out. And then you've got the collaborative organization, where you've got high alignment and high autonomy, and you've got this vision that you're going for, and you're all kind of working towards it independently. So the question is, how do we get there? What does that look like? What is that, how do you get aligned autonomy? So yeah, this is a sort of an org chart, I guess. You've got your CEO at the top and your engineers who are doing all the work further down the graph. And as you get to the top of this picture, you've got the big picture in your head. So you've got a lot of context if you're sitting up at the top of an organization. You know what the marketing team are doing, you know what the sales team are doing, you know what your stock price is doing, you know all this kind of stuff. You know what your bank balance is. So you've got the big picture, right? And the guys at the bottom have the detail, because the guys at the top are never going to know what's going on in the code base. They're never going to know the details of that. So collectively, all the people down here, in the engineers and sales guys and everywhere else throughout the organization, they have a lot more knowledge than the people do at the top. But the people at the top, have this context and this big picture. So if we look at an authoritative organization, the decisions are being made up here at the top, and to make decisions you need both the context and the detail. I think that's it's pretty clear to me that you need both to make any decision. So what happens is the details are being drawn up from the bottom of the organization, and here you get all your kind of awkward conversations about estimating stuff really precisely, and detailed conversations about why you can't do that, and all this kind of stuff. So that the people at the top are really drawing up the details so that they can make the decisions up at the top, and the solutions are passed back down again. So this is an authoritative organization, and what we want is the decisions being made down here towards the bottom of the tree. So again, you need that context as well as the detail to make decisions. So in this situation, you have to pass the vision down, and this bit's actually quite important, that you pass the solution back up. I think it doesn't work if you're sitting there in isolation and not kind of back reporting what's actually going on, for a multitude of reasons. Partly because it helps to build the context, so the vision is correct, and partly so the people understand. So there's some sort of confirmation that the vision has been understood properly. So that's a collaborative organization. That's where we want to be. So I guess back to this again. If you look at the authoritative organization, build a bridge. Do this thing, do it like this. This is what it's going to look like. And if we look at a collaborative organization, it's more like, we need to cross the river. Go away, figure out how you're going to do that, and come back and tell me what you're going to do to cross the river. And if you want to build a raft, that's cool. Go for it. So I think all of us have a responsibility to, certainly for any kind of position of leadership, to try and communicate in this way. And to think about how we're communicating with our teams if we want them to really be collaborative and have that aligned autonomy. But that's not enough, right? We've also got to work together as a team, and building a team is quite difficult. It's very easy to get a bunch of people in the same room and call them a team. It's actually quite difficult to get a team. So I'm a big fan of the theory of constraints. I don't know how many of you have come across the theory of constraints and sort of thought about it properly. It comes from manufacturing, and I guess I'll just go into it in terms of manufacturing to begin with, so we understand. If you've got let's say you're building a car, and you've got a bunch of different kind of manufacturing processes to build your car. So you're building a steering wheel, you're building a gear stick, and you've got to assemble the whole car, right? Look at those three. And you're building steering wheels twice as fast as you're building gear sticks. You might think that's really good because you're really good at building steering wheels, and that's a really good thing. But actually what you've done is you've ended up with a whole load of wasted steering wheels that are sitting around. And you can actually add that up and say that's a cost to the company. You can say each steering wheel's cost me £6 to build, and I've got 6,000 of them, and that's a lot of money sitting there in a big pile, right? So that's a waste if you're doing that, despite the fact that you're building a steering wheels really cheaply and really well, because you're not building enough gear sticks, and the gear sticks are the constraint, right? And they're the ones, and the only way to optimize this process is to build your gear sticks faster, and you need to focus all your attention on the efficiency of building gear sticks. It doesn't matter how efficient you are at building steering wheels at this point. That's not going to help you produce cars more quickly. And then you may have the situation over here on the right where the assembly line for actually putting it all together, it's got spare capacity because there aren't enough gear sticks being produced, so they can't do much with it. So in other words, the concentration of effort has to be on the constraint store point. Now in software this applies. So we've got John here. He's got an easy task. But he's gonna put a lot of effort into it and make his code really awesome because that's his task, and he's got a week to do it in or 2 weeks to do it in or whatever it is. So he's gonna make sure that his code looks pretty damn good. Dave is the poor sod who's got to work a lot of overtime and is probably not going to get there at the end of the day anyway, because his task is really difficult. And then Sarah's, she may not get her task done actually because she's dependent on Dave and she's waiting on him, and she's done what she can, so she goes off and does some other stuff that's perhaps not the most important stuff to be doing, if you like. So if we look at that, there's a lack of accountability there. Everybody's basically saying it's not my fault that the team's failing, it's not my fault that that John, was it Dave, sorry, that Dave's not able to get the stuff through, that we're not gonna complete this on time. I've done my bit, I've done my task. And there's a focus there on the individual. I've done my bit, I'm being judged by what I've done. You've given me a task, I've done it, I'm not the problem. That's not a team. You can put them in the same group, you can have them build the same bit of software. It's not a team, that's a working group, that's a bunch of people sitting together in a bus stop. It's not what I would call a team. Now if we look at this as a team, you start to get slightly different conversations coming through. Dave needs help if we succeed, I'll do this as fast as I can and then go and help him. I've done what I can on this, but I know that Dave's struggling here, so I'm going to take on the other work that I can and make his life a bit easier. And Dave's sitting there going, thanks guys, because I couldn't have done it without you, which is fair. So in other words, a team stops thinking about tasks belonging to John, Dave and Sarah. They all own all the tasks. They collectively want to get this stuff through and out. Where am I going now? I'm trying to remember my slides. So in order to do that, I think I'm a massive believer in proximate goals. This, I guess, I would call a sprint a proximate goal, trying to get stuff through in a week. I think that there are a lot of kind of incentives, things like share options and things. I don't have any problem with share options per se, but I don't think they're particularly motivating because they're too far off, they're too removed from your work day to day. And the other reason is because you're not the only person. Sorry, you haven't got the capacity to influence it in its entirety. Your team should have everything that they need in order to achieve the goal that you've given them. If you feel like it's dependent on what the sales guys do and I don't have any influence over what the sales guys do, then that's much more difficult than if you've got a situation where everybody's got collectively the team's got the ability to be able to achieve the goal that you've given them. So this is where things like front-end and back-end teams, and there are good reasons for doing them. For doing that sometimes. I don't have a sort of blanket thing against them, but this is where they get difficult because you've got the front-end team, dependent on stuff from the back-end. You give them a task to get this stuff finished, and then the back-end haven't pulled their weight or haven't done what we expected them to do. So it's very difficult to kind of judge them on that. I'd also strongly advocate breaking down the tasks that you're trying to achieve as a whole team. I think there are far too many places where we're trying to save time, save resources, I suppose, and somebody goes away and breaks down all the tasks for the team, and then kind of distributes them within the team to individuals. The way that we work is very much kind of getting together as a cross-functional team, which involves design and test. We don't use tests anymore. If we were to use tests, they'd be there. And we look at what's coming up for the sprint, and we break down the tasks together as a team, and then all the team, they all own those tasks collectively. So the team has to get that sprint through. It's not a question of individuals getting it through. So the individuals will choose the tasks that they want to do in the moment, and very often pair program with them as well. Yeah, and then this one's important, that we should be measuring and incentivizing team performance, not individual performance. I think a lot of this is common sense, actually, guys, but a lot of it's not done in a lot of places. Lencioni's 5 dysfunctions of a team. Has anybody come across that? One. Yeah. 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 I think the difficulty with environments that aren't agile like that is almost by definition you're working in horizontal slices across the stack, right? So and I think it's one of the fundamental problems with waterfall. When you have a choice, you shouldn't do it, but sometimes you don't, I guess, and particularly in sort of hardware and things. But is those integration points between the horizontal layers? They're very difficult. You have to predefine them up front, and it gets very hard at that point. But I think you've got to do your best to make sure that that the people in the team have the capacity to influence their own results. So even if that's a technical result, even if that's completing your API as per the agreement with the other the other team, then that's the best that you can do at that point. I think you want to work in as thinner and as vertical slices as possible, and if you've got constraints on the organization that are making that difficult, then you can't always solve it, but you should go into the most extremes you can in that direction. Sorry, that was a pretty poor answer, but yeah. Yep. Yeah. I wasn't actually here, but it could be. There's no reason why it shouldn't be. I'm more thinking, the team gets congratulated for getting a sprint through on time. The team gets congratulated for getting a project out. It's not. I very, very rarely have reason to go up and pick out an individual. Certainly not in front of everybody else and say well done, or you could have done this better. It's the team's responsibility to make sure that that everybody's putting their weight. It's the team's responsibility to make sure that people are getting the training they need. And yeah, it's not necessarily linked to compensation, but there's no reason why it shouldn't be. Yeah, sorry.
Do you have any, sorry if you're going to bring this up later in the talk, but do you have any advice on tracking this stuff? Because I think particularly working with tools like Jira, which I'm sure everyone loves, that you do assign you have like tasks where you assign them to individuals and sort of track it on that basis. So are there sort of good ways of sort of tracking team performance, or you just kind of aggregate individual?
So I don't assign. I mean, we use something similar to Jira. We don't actually use Jira, but we have that idea. Now we come out of sprint planning and we have a bunch of user stories that need to be completed. I give that to the team, and the team decide who's going to do what when. So they're the ones that come in the morning and say, oh, I finished that thing last night, I'll pick up this one next. And they'll have a discussion amongst themselves sometimes and decide what they're going to do. But it's not a case of somebody else kind of saying, you're doing that task and you're doing that task and you're doing that task. That's very much kind of kept within the team. In terms of what you can measure in terms of team performance, there's a bunch of things. Some of them are quite dangerous. Things like measuring velocity is a bit of an anti-pattern. The one thing that I work in a very small team, so it's pretty obvious when things are going wrong. But the one thing that I do measure at the moment is actually the number of releases per development day. And if that starts moving in the wrong direction, then I know that there's probably something wrong somewhere. So we get 1.5 releases per developer per day out, which I think is pretty good going. And they're all kind of these small vertical slices that are tested and done, and right the way through the sprint. So that's the one thing that I measure, and then we have a burn down chart that we look at collectively as a team, and that's more kind of the short term goal is trying to get that down to 0. So we can stand ups in the morning if that's looking very flat. There'll be a conversation about what's going on here and what's happening and why. So yeah, I guess it's those two things really. Certainly, my current experience as it is. So Lencioni talks about 5 dysfunctions of a team. So what we want, results is the word, but what we really mean by that is a focus on team results rather than on individuals' results. Okay, so we're talking about attention to the results of the team, attention to the results of the projects, I guess. So we saw when we were going through those a few slides back, when we were going through those John, Dave and Sarah things, we saw in the first example there wasn't the attention to the team results, there was attention to individual task results, and the second example that there was that attention to team results. So what do you need to get that attention to the results? Well, you need people to be accountable for the team. You need people to be accountable for the team's performance rather than for their own performance, so that's the first thing. Now, in order to be accountable for the team's performance, people need to be committed and believe that the team, and sort of bought into what the team is trying to do. So that's the next thing. You can't get accountability unless you've got commitment. You can't get results unless you've got accountability. Now, you can't get commitment unless you've got healthy conflict. Because you can't get commitment if you've got a situation where people aren't speaking up, or where people are disagreeing violently, and therefore you've got people not talking to each other in the team. So you need this healthy conflict element in here, and this is the biggest challenge actually. Now, to get the healthy conflict in, trust, and it underlies all of it. You've got to have trust in each other. Now, trust can have many different meanings. It's another one like this results word on this thing. It's a very specific type of trust that I'm talking about. And it's actually the trust to be vulnerable with each other. It's the trust to be able to put your hands up and say, I screwed up there, I'm sorry, I shouldn't have done that, or I got that one wrong, and to know that you're not going to be absolutely slated by the rest of the team for saying it. It's the trust to be able to take a stand, hold a position, and then when you realise you're wrong on that, and somebody else has got the better side of the argument, to be able to say, well, actually, you've got it, and walk away from it, and know that you're not going to, it's not going to come back at you. So that's right at the core of it, and I think that's the reason that we want to judge, fundamentally, why we want to judge the team's performance rather than individual performance. Right. So why go to all this bother? What's the advantages of a collaborative culture? Well, there are 3. People are focused on the constraint. I've already kind of talked about that in terms of the theory of constraints. The team can adapt to a changing situation, and employees are happier. I'm going to talk about the next 2 now. So there was this Prussian general in the mid-1800s. He sort of, I think he was a kid during the Napoleonic Wars, and then he was the big head honcho of the Prussian army during the Franco-Prussian Wars, which the Prussians won, hands down. They absolutely slaughtered the French. And when they were in the Napoleonic Wars, they obviously were on the other side of the equation, at least for the first half of the Napoleonic Wars. The French walked all over them. And this guy kind of saw that and was trying to understand why, and the Prussian army was very much kind of led in this authoritative way from the top, from the emperor or the king or whatever they called him, the Kaiser. I don't know who he was, but Tsar. Was he a Tsar? Anyway, he stood at the top of the pyramid and he sort of said, right, I want those guys to move 4 paces left and I want those guys to move 3 paces right, and these guys can retreat. And he was kind of very organized and structured in the way that he did it. And they got absolutely walked over by the French army, who were rabbles, the wrong word obviously, but they were far more kind of free flowing and far more autonomous in the way that they fought. So he looks at this and he said, right, well, there are 3 things here, 3 gaps. The first is the alignment gap, and that's the difference between what that general wants somebody to do and what they actually do. And that's not because they're being belligerent or they're just ignoring what they're being told. It's because it's actually bloody difficult to communicate things properly and concisely. And this is particularly true in software because we've got very complex features that we're trying to release. It's very hard to communicate exactly what we want and to think about exactly what we want up front. So in an authoritative organization, that's the response. We need to get more and more detail into the requirements. We need to get more and more precise with what we're doing. And in a collaborative organization, we kind of go the other way. And we say, right, well, we're going to say what we want the team to achieve. We're going to say the results that we want. And they can go and figure out the best solution and come back to us with it. The second gap he noticed was the knowledge gap. And that's basically, I don't know everything. I'm not all-knowing. So, again, massive problem in software, right? Because we don't, the existing code base is often I'm going to say a nightmare. It's not always a nightmare, but even if it's not a nightmare, if it's a big code base, there's no way that you can understand everything that's going on in there. And of course, the solution's going to be quite complex normally, so it's very difficult. Your upfront knowledge is pretty limited in this kind of situation. You don't know anything like. So, an authoritative organization, they basically ignore this, in my experience, and they expect the engineers to kind of be able to give very precise estimates of how long things are going to take, expect them to know exactly how they're going to build it up front. You get these sort of architect roles and things which are all about, well, potentially all about this in terms of defining how the thing's going to be structured, and other people go away and build it. So it doesn't really work. It goes wrong time and time again. Collaborative organization, it can recognize this. It can say, these guys know more than us. They'll learn as they go, and we just again need to tell them what it is we're trying to achieve, and they'll iterate and they'll come up with the right solution. Third gap is the effects gap, and that's the difference between what we expect to happen, even in a situation where we've got complete knowledge and people are doing exactly what we tell them to do, and what actually happens. And again, this is a massive problem in software. I couldn't find the reference to the stat, but I'm sure I've read somewhere a few times that far fewer than half the product changes we make have the desired effect on user behavior. If you start measuring user behavior, and particularly if you're kind of defining success criteria up front about what you expect to see happening in terms of user behavior, that's not often what happens when you make a change in software. So in an authoritative organization, this is a big problem, and this is why we've got such bad software knocking around in my mind, because the engineers were asked to build a specific solution. They went away, they built that specific solution, it cost a lot of money, and it's going to be really difficult to tell them to scrap it and redo it because it's not had the desired effect, right? Whereas in a collaborative organization, it's slightly easier because the cross-functional team wasn't given a specific solution to build. They were given the change in user behavior. That's what they wanted. That's what we wanted to see. And if it hasn't worked, then it's up to them to figure out how to make it work. And that's what Agile's all about, really. Cool. And then I spoke about happy employees, happy people in that previous slide. So a lack of autonomy and a lack of direction are often cited reasons for unhappiness at work. I think, again, I've lost the reference, but I read somewhere that autonomy or lack of autonomy and a lack of recognition are the 2 main reasons that people quit work. So, I mean, this is really important in terms of staff retention. But why is it so important? Why do people get so frustrated? Well, they get frustrated because they've got something to contribute, and they're being told to do stuff in a way that they know isn't efficient generally. They know it's not the right way to do it, or at least they're heavily convinced that it's not the right way to do it, and that is an extremely frustrating position to be in. We've all been there, I'm sure, where you're being told to do something, you know it's not the right way to do it, but you're being told to do it anyway, and you can't say anything about it. And it's so destructive, right? Because if you're anything like us, then you've got a lot of bright people, and why are you not listening to them? You know? So, yeah, it's much better to work in an environment where your opinion's heard and properly considered, and this has to be through healthy conflict, and that's kind of at the crux of it. Cool. That's the view from my window that I get from work every day. So yeah, come and join us. We're looking for one experienced engineer, and it's an awesome place to be. So thank you very much. So there's this question of estimation. I actually did a previous talk on estimation, which I'll send you the slides for. And that's slightly separate from who chooses, what the solution's going to look like. So you can still, in theory, have a situation where the managers turn around and say, we need to change this user behavior. The team goes away and tries to figure out how they can do that together. Comes back with a solution that they say back up to the management, this is what we're going to do, and this is how long it's going to take, and this is how long it's going to cost, how much it's going to cost. You can still do that without taking the autonomy away from the team. The question of how you estimate something like this when you're in this environment, which is where you've got this big knowledge gap, is interesting and I think a different topic. But it doesn't actually, it's not directly connected to this, funnily, in my mind. Does that make sense? You look on. Yeah.
Hello. It seems like a lot of this is really centered on product-based companies, but you all work together on products. How do you think this will change if you're more of a client-focused company where a client comes in with specific demands?
Yeah, that's a very interesting question, because you're going to have a client that's got very specific demands. Then you've already got that kind of solution being imposed on you from the client rather than from internally. I think ultimately it comes to the same point, though, that you've got this knowledge gap, you've got a team that's got a lot of experience, and this may be completely impossible, but I would suggest that the answer there is to go back to your clients and say, look, what is it that you're trying to do? Let me understand what it is that you need and what's underlying the call for this particular solution. And certainly the way that we deal with our with our clients, we've got lots of clients, so it's a slightly different situation from having one person asking for one specific thing. But there's an apocryphal thing from Henry Ford where he said, if I'd asked my clients what they'd wanted, they'd have said faster horses. I'm sure a lot of you have heard that, right? And we use a method called, or a sort of ideology called, jobs to be done. And basically what we're trying to do there is go away and uncover the underlying job that needs to be done by that client. So if they're asking for faster horses, what they need to do is they need to travel places faster, right? And that's the underlying job. And then from there you can say, well, okay, you need to travel somewhere faster. Let me think about that. I'm the expert in the technology. I'm the expert in the product ultimately. So let me come back to you and show you how we could achieve that. It may be totally impractical. I'm not in your shoes, obviously, but that's the way that I would try to approach it. I think you can't get to this position where you've got autonomy if you've been told exactly what to do. It's just the two don't square. Yep. Yes.
How do you deal with that?
Yeah, potentially. It's not completely daft. I mean, you've got to coach them. You've got to try and turn them around and make sure that they make sure that they're more on board with what you're trying to do and why. But ultimately, they're the people that we try and screen out in interviews a little bit. They can be very good technically, but if they can't get this side of the way of working and things, then it's very difficult if they want to be directed the whole time. That said, if you're working in a team and you've got that support of 5 or 6 other people who are all kind of, it's not completely destructive if you've got one person who's kind of following and not contributing in that sense, but is producing a lot of code and good quality code. That they're not contributing to, and you want them to be, and you can't afford to have a lot of them in your team, because otherwise the team doesn't make any decisions ultimately. Absolutely. Yeah. And I just sort of following on from that, I don't think that you should think that you're the only one that's responsible for that person's performance and that person's ability to contribute. I think that is a team problem ultimately. The same way with when you've got somebody new, it's the team's. It's partly the team's responsibility to make sure that person's been given enough time to learn, and that you're giving them enough time to learn. That's something that's important to tackle as a team. Yep. Yeah. Depending on the answer to the question. Well, what we do is we get a whip. No. So yeah, the team incentives. It's quite soft. A lot of it. It's not a case of you get a massive bonus if you get this stuff through. One of the reasons I don't want the team to be working too hard for a couple of reasons. One is I don't think it fits with our culture. I was saying to a few of you before that or it may have been at the beginning of this talk actually, that idea of people wanting to turn up to work. I think if you've got them, working 12 hours a day, then that's quite difficult to achieve. So I don't want them to be working, excessive hours. Secondly, I think it can be quite destructive, particularly in terms of technical debt. If you've got, very tight deadlines on people, they'll take shortcuts to achieve them. So it's kind of a bit softer than that kind of very strict stuff. A lot of it's around kind of recognition around achieving our sprints. We get the vast majority of our sprints. That's another story again. I put a little bit of time in there for Slack, call it, which is basically refactoring time and time for urgent work that's coming in. So we don't completely fill our sprints, and we get them most of the time. So there's a lot of kind of in things like retrospectives, and we also meet as a kind of company once a week. There's kind of public praise, which I think is crucial. And then there's things like we go out for a meal together when we successfully complete a project, and it's that kind of level of stuff that I'm talking about here, really, rather than a massive, great big bonus for getting it through. Yeah. Yeah.
About if a job has a mental component, once people are paid, the going rates are slightly better. Giving them money makes them perform worse.
That's interesting.
And autonomy mastery and purpose makes them perform much better.
Yeah. That's interesting. It doesn't completely surprise me. It surprises me that giving them money makes them perform worse, but it doesn't surprise me it doesn't make a massive impact on how they're performing.
Yeah, they did the test in America.
Yeah.
Right, that's because your money already is. And they're trying to get in India, and they performed giving people more money made them perform much worse than they did.
That's fascinating. I wonder whether it's around ego and that side of things, and people not playing together as a team. I don't know. It's interesting. Yeah.
That's the thing that came up on the slide that you didn't comment on. What is T-shaped experience?
Oh yeah, T-shaped experience. So this doesn't apply to everybody in every single circumstance. I think that there are different companies that have different constraints on them and different kind of ways of working that are required. I think hardware is a very different world from SaaS where I am, for example. But I want to have a situation where people have a broad experience, so they can dabble just about anywhere in our code base, but they also have a depth of experience in one area. So they're the experts in one particular part of our code base or one particular language. But they have this kind of breadth of experience that allows them to be able to touch anywhere. And then, if you've got a team that's full of that, and this is the nirvana, right? It's basically impossible to find. But if you've got a team which is full of overlapping T-shaped experience, then that's really ideal because everybody can do everything, but you've got within that team the expertise to be able to kind of train each other up and expand the experience. But yeah, as far as I'm concerned, for our particular use case, it's not particularly helpful if somebody's very, very good in one particular skill and not really interested in learning outside that, because they need to be able to be thrown in. They need to be able to move across and to be able to get stuff through. It's about that theory of constraint stuff again, I guess. Yep. Well, I think either the conflict isn't occurring at all, and as soon as somebody sticks their hand up, really goes, yeah, okay, that's fine, and shuts down. So if you're not seeing any conflict, that's definitely a red flag. And the other side is that it's sort of flipped over into the personal and into the more kind of extreme levels of a lot of kind of stamping around and not listening to each other and slightly derogatory in terms of the way that we kind of assume other people's knowledge to be and that side of things. You should be in a situation where everybody's kind of respecting each other, and another one of our values is actually humility. It's this idea that you stand up and you know what you know, but you also know what you don't know, and you're aware of your own limitations. Which I think is pretty crucial in this, and you can get into a situation where you've got somebody who's really kind of pushing and punching very hard in the conflicts, and that's definitely a red flag. So I like to keep the teams quite small, and I think if you've got a team we've got a team of 3 engineers at the moment, we're going to 4, as I say. I think but certainly by the time we get to 6 engineers, I'm a bit confused about what to do with 5, to be honest with you, because I want to split them, but then you've got 2 engineers by themselves and somebody's away ill or something. That's a bit of a problem. But that kind of size of team, I don't generally find it a problem. I think it becomes more of a problem when you've actually, you talk about the number of connections between different people. You've got 2 people, you've got 1 connection. You've got 3 people, you've got 3 connections. You've got 4 people. It starts. I can't remember the formula. It's like n times n plus 1 over 2 or something, and n times n minus 1 over 2. So it expands rapidly. And what actually happens is even though you're not kind of formally breaking people up into different teams, they informally break up into different teams within that, and then you get these kind of communication challenges that you're kind of talking about. So I think there's a secret there, which is to keep your teams to the Jeff Bezos 2 pizza size, and it becomes a lot. There must be massive pizzas, by the way. How the hell do you feel 8 people with 2 pizzas? But then it becomes a lot simpler to kind of get around that. Does that answer the question, or do you still have challenges even at that size? Yeah. Mm-hmm. Disagreeing. Well, I think there's something around healthy conflict there as well. If you've got 3 hours of people sort of throwing things at each other, then you slipped into unhealthy conflict. But yeah, there's definitely, and also there's a point around people perhaps nitpicking around things that matter very little, which is maybe where you're heading with that a little bit. Some of that's just about kind of agreeing in advance, what your conventions are in the code base and things. But it still raises its head sometimes. But I think ultimately it's the people that have taken on the task that end up owning that. So, as I was describing earlier, we've got 15 tasks that go into the sprint or whatever it is, and then it's individuals or perhaps pairs picking those off and saying, I'll do this. That's where the ownership is. Of course, you still get debates around code reviews sometimes, but they tend to be fairly sensible in my experience of the team that I've got. Because we've got that underlying trust and we're not trying to prove ourselves better than each other the whole time, I think that's the key to it. Well, you've still got tasks. You can't get everybody working on everything. So yeah, you do need that. The individuals kind of owning their own things that they're putting through. Yeah. Yeah. The interview process is a bit of a nightmare because we reject a lot of people and struggle to find them in the first place before you turn them down. So, no, we spend a lot of time interviewing on values across the company. So we've got the values that we interview against. We've spoken about some of them. So togetherness, work together as one team, humble. There are various other ones in there. So we do kind of consciously articulate what our culture is and interview against it consciously. I think that's probably the clearest answer to the question is really kind of being aware of what your culture is and meaning something. I think there's a lot of companies that don't have values, and then there's a whole lot of other companies that stuck something up on the wall, and they're kind of aspirational values. They're not really the values that they own and the way that they think. So I think that's difficult. You just need to be honest with yourself about what your values actually are. So yeah, it's tough. But once you've got there, then I think it's easy enough to kind of construct interview questions around those values and to kind of be consciously aware of them as you're interviewing somebody. I'll always sort of try and challenge somebody in an interview and see how they respond. I won't do it in a sort of dickhead way, but I'll be questioning and querying and sort of saying, oh, we do it slightly differently. What do you think about that? And just seeing how they kind of perform on that. Cool. One more. Yep.
Let's say sometimes when I communicate with a team member, I would say, I've done this a month ago, and I'm trying to precisely the way you want to fail because of that and that. But I can't exactly just go and tell them that, hey, this won't work. So I go to workarounds to share my experience with them so that we're sort of on the same level. And then I say, well, maybe what if you think about this case, then the solution won't work, etc., etc. So I have some things I sometimes consciously do to avoid,
confrontation.
Yeah, sort of confrontation that would be used.
Yeah. I think. Sorry, yeah, go on.
So do you have things that you consciously do against your own, sort of first instinct to maintain this collaborative environment?
Yeah, I do. The key one is ask questions rather than tell people. If you've got something that you think's not quite right, then you sort of ask a question around that and say, "Oh, what about this? And would it work with?" And just framing the way that you kind of communicate is important. There's no question. I think that's you just kind of brought up a bit of a light bulb in the back of my head. I think there is a difference between conflict and confrontation, and perhaps there was an earlier question around when those red flags are. I think it's when you're slipping into confrontation that's the problem. And you should be having conflict, but it's my back exercises, everybody. I'm not going to start doing them on the stage. Yeah. Okay, thanks very much, guys.